We have previously looked at gravitationally lensed images, and I spent quite some time examining one of those images, and I thought it was high time that we picked another image and dissected that. This will be slightly different in terms of it's not really so much of a tutorial on how to use GIMP, so we'll be cutting to the various bits that I have identified as mirroring or reflections within that image. So without further ado, let's crack on. Okay, we're going to start by just examining the basic shape of the image before we jump down into the detail of what we can see. So the first thing to observe about the image is that, again, we see the same sort of circular pattern that we've seen in the other image that we looked at. We see these sort of shells of circle as you move outwards and around and around. Again, there are more detail in some sections than others, but we'll sort of dive into that detail in just a second. Interesting enough, there is also this red sort of streak that runs through this galaxy, and this galaxy obviously sits closer to us than the streak is from us. There are also a number of interesting galaxies that sit around the periphery. And again, this is a very interesting shape here because to me it looks like this is also being bent and twisted around this sort of central, and whether these are two stars or two galaxies, I mean, there must be galaxies to be that bright and potentially that far away. But again, there could be closer stars that are, not affecting this at all. But again, for the closer stars, you would expect to see that sort of mark. That indicates that it's much closer to us than these that are further away. Again, there are smaller streaks all over the image, but we'll come back to that as well. So I'm going to dive into the detail. I'm going to pick some bits and then chop around. I'll cut away for the first bit and then come back once I've sort of found particular patterns that we're interested in examining. So first up, we're going to start with this image. And I think you can already start to see that there is sort of a reflection across this boundary here on this side and this side. And there are two stars here and two stars there. So let's see if we can make these parts of the images match up. So let's take a copy. So the first thing we're going to do is obviously reflect it. And move it over here. Let's move it, change the opacity, and then overlay it. That's pretty good, I would say. Now, you notice that it does align quite nicely with those two stars at the top there, these stars for those stars. And you could argue whether there is a bright part of the image there or not, but certainly this would indicate that potentially there is. What is interesting is the detail that maybe wasn't as apparent when I first cut this, but you can see there are two stars there and two stars there, which are sort of visible over there. And when we place this down here, it's not a perfect match, but potentially that one is matching with this one or with that one. Like, is the bottom part being distorted more than the top part? Not really that clear. Oh, hold on. No, I do have those in that. I was just wondering whether there was more detail here, because you can see these two over there. Yeah. Just wondering whether it's those two reflected upside down on that one. Okay, well, let's leave that one there. And I'm going to do a little bit more hunting and I will be back with you. So again, just this one that we copied across to here, if we just take that and place it over those two stars, it is a pretty good match. However, nothing else matches. There's no stars or no detail underneath the image here. There are some stars there, but they don't seem to align with anything that is visible below here. And there are those two there. It's an off chance. It's quite far away from it. But I would say that certainly matches up with those on that side. Now if we take these here, so this is the part of the image we were just looking at. Much fainter, and certainly more of a sharp angle that's visible there. So if we take a copy of this one, and move it over here. See, we can see the bottom stars here are more separated and have a sharp angle compared to the top ones. So I'm wondering if we flip this top to bottom. Let's bring the opacity down to about 50 again. I'd say it was a reasonable match. I think for me, this one, this bottom star needs to be pulled in a little bit further. And obviously we don't see any visibility of these bottom stars, but we don't know whether there's something obscuring that view. We can certainly see that there is the star on either end of this are nowhere near as bright as they were over here. But I will keep digging. Okay, next up, if we look at this, so above the one that we're looking at, we see possibly a collection of 3 stars and sort of an angle change. It doesn't continue in a straight line, it sort of curves downwards. There are dots of blue on either end, and I'm not sure that they are repeating the same thing, but just not as good, more obscured, or whether they are part of that image. But we see again the same blue here with an angle change, and again here with an angle change. So let's see if we can take a copy of this one. And for now, we're just going to ignore those stars on either side. And let's start with a larger one, I think. With the opacity to 50. I think what's also obvious when you look at the original image is the bright part is on this side and then it's not as bright. And here the bright part is in that side and not as much on that side. So we have to flip it down the middle. There we go. And let's just turn it. Bring it into position. Oh, wow. That's actually a very good match. Yeah. A very good match with the turn as well. I think we're not going to find that it matches up as well with this one, but let's just give it a go. And in this case, I would say the brightness is on the other side. So we would have to reflect it back to the way that it was. It's similar, but I'm not going to say it's as good a match as we got down in this part. For me, what's interesting is the angle is more, it's sharper. The angle here, it's a more acute angle compared to this one. So again, is something here twisting that more compared to that? Or I think when you lay it underneath, it becomes more obvious. That there is a difference in the angle between the two. Compared to here, where it was pretty much a match-up. Now, can we do the same here? Because for me, that's the same blue pattern that continues around. But what's interesting here is we see the formation of two lines, potentially a third and maybe a fourth on that side. We then have this object here, and then again on this side, we see blue and a very strange amount of blue down here. Could all just be coincidence. But let's see what happens when we take our copy from up here. I'm just going to steal this one because it wasn't a brilliant match. So what happens when we overlay it on top of here? Well, I think what's obvious is they are the opposite. So we need to flip this across the middle, which is actually flipping it across that axis, which I think is the vertical one. Yep. Oh wow, I didn't actually expect it to match up so well. So what about that one then? If I just take a copy of this one, just move this one out the way. Oh, that one. Now it's a lot harder on this one to see which is the bright. I'm gut feel is that's the bright bit and that's not, but it does sort of line up, but it's nowhere near as nice as that one. So is it repeating the same way around? But let's just try flipping it across the center, which would be horizontal. Possibly. It is nowhere near as clear as this one, I think. And you could argue which way round it is, but that's kind of strange in itself. Why do we have, although I suppose you could argue that maybe it's separating here, but why most of these is it one line, and then when we get to here, it's splitting into two. And just out of interest, is there anything in this? Well, there's really not enough to call that a good match. but I'm guessing it'd be very similar to this one. Like that, something like that. Maybe slightly twisted more. That's fascinating to see that double image here. You could argue whether it's the same way around or whether it's flipped. I don't know. There's not enough clarity in this part to really confirm that. Okay, I'm going to do some more digging. So we were looking at this blue part of the image, and this one. This is the one we looked at and copied it down to here and then down further. Because we saw that double line, just curious to see whether this, I mean, maybe this is the original, but is this a reflection or a copy of that and that? So let's very quickly just give that a go. Yeah, that would be useful if I actually selected the image. Let's try again. Make it 50%. It's not bad. Problem is there's not a lot of detail in this part. You can definitely see there are possibly 3 stars there. And when we examine this, you could argue that there are 3, maybe 4 bright spots in that image. And they do seem to align reasonably well. Yeah, I'd say it's not conclusive, but it's not out of the realms of possibility. In which case, the question then is, in this, we do see another line. So is that double image that we see down here, is that actually just the other part of this becoming more visible? Maybe. Maybe. What about up here? Can we drag? Let's just take the one we've got already. Oh, that fits very nicely, doesn't it? It's slightly more of a... Well, I say very nicely. I mean, there's not a lot of detail in this part of the image, but that's... I mean, the fact that they all align, there's a line that you can draw through those images. So for me, there's a line that you can draw through these, like that. It's not perfect because really the center would be, for that one would be there, and then for that one would be there. So almost like it's curving. Fascinating. Fascinating. Okay, I think we're nearly done with this image, but there are a few other things I think that I want to show you. So let me just clear this up and I will be right back with you. Yeah, I think I found another one. So this is part of the image where we see so the main image is up here, the gravitational circular part. And then, as I mentioned, there's this other offshoot to the side. If we take this, so the bottom half here, and we rotate it the other way around, it's not perfect. But what is interesting is how well the arc lines up. If we can see there's like a bend there. So if I line up that bend in there, then we see that these two line up with what appear to be 2 points over there. And this then perfectly matches the curve of these. Now you don't see any of this, But again, what we don't know is whether this sits in front or behind of the image that we're looking at. But it matches not only the position of those, but matches that line, which is an exact copy of that line. Fascinating. The other one I found interesting as well is this thing here, which probably sits in the foreground, so it's not as far back as some of these, but what a weird shaped object this is. Whether it's a galaxy or something else, it seems to have 3 arms rather than, you know, the normal 2 or more multiple arms, but they don't seem to be evenly distributed. And also the strange, I mean, I know there's not an awful lot of resolution in the image, but strange things coming off the bottom of it, and we see again more of these blue lines above and below it. Just fascinating, really. This too, again, this is just a continuation of another larger shell that goes on the outside, and we can see that this star probably is repeated a number of different times along this line. But what is interesting here is the starlight is clearly smudged upwards and downwards and not outwards. And also the curve has changed. So from being a curve in this direction, at the top here, it suddenly starts to make a deviation. It curves in the opposite direction. Could be coincidence that there is a galaxy that sits just here, because again, we don't know whether that's much closer to us than where this light is coming from. But that's an unusual thing to see in that image. And again, there is nothing necessarily that this connects to. And we see these stripes all over the image. Little stripes and lines. You know, are those the signature, the remnants of slight imperfections in Birkeland currents? I mean, who knows? They're all over the image. And again, the fact that some of the galaxies seem to, even if they are galaxies, these may not be galaxies. That might be a galaxy. But again, we see these lines seem to align themselves to the curvature. Not all perfectly, but again, could there be, again, if I look at this image and just using a little bit of imagination, assuming that this is sort of a circular Birkeland current, and we've got, you know, whatever causes this phenomena, and we don't really understand why it might happen, whether it's a boundary condition or something else, but we can see that curvature going off in this direction. So do we have sort of a pipe that goes up in this direction, so circular going off in that direction? And therefore, I just deselect. Therefore, if we look at this image, so there's the pipe going off in that direction, is this that we see down here a branch off this main structure? I don't know, it's an interesting thought. We know that Birkeland currents do branch, so is that a possibility? Is that what we're seeing here? The fact that we see this curve, which is a smaller curve within a larger one, but at a different angle. So if this one is going off in this direction, is this branching off and sort of heading into this image? This is the second gravitational lensed image that I've looked at, and I think it shows the same sort of features that we looked at before. If there are other suggestions that you've got in terms of images you would like me to look at, then drop those down below in the comments. If there are other images which are not gravitationally lensed, them too, because I think I want to expand this to not just gravitational lensed images. So drop those down below and I will review those and try and work out how to analyze some of those images as well. As always, be brave, be curious. The truth is waiting for us. Until next time.